Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today we're going to talk about the 90s era Gibson Les Paul Customs. If you're ever shopping for one of these things, you're going to see the term good wood era show up. And what years does it exactly apply to? Well, it depends who you're talking to, because people stretch this all the way into like the 2000s. Personally, for me, I think 1990 through about 1995, I could let it spill over until about 98. But once you get so close to the 2000s, it just becomes a marketing gimmick. So what exactly does it even mean anyways? The 90s is kind of a celebrated time for Gibson because it's a time of change, and change for the better. Even though if you ever bring up Henry Juskowitz as the old CEO, most people will have a negative opinion. He did some amazing things in the 90s and brought the company back to life. Now, it wasn't just him, it was his workers, it was his team and his other investors that bought the company in the mid-80s. But some characteristics that you'll start to see transition back are two-piece maple tops. You can still find some three pieces in the 90s, but take a look at the dish carve. They start bringing that back. These are going to be a little bit more pronounced than a 70s or 80s custom. This is also the time when the modern day pickup was birthed, the 490 series. So that includes things like the 490R, 490T, as well as the 498T and all those other good things, like the Gibson USA base plate. This is when this started to come into play, and they ditched that whole patent number thing. They started to offer a few more finish options. Things happened like the limited colors edition in 1990, and then there were also catalog ordered guitars. You can see a review of one of those here. And these 90s guitars, they just have like a very distinctive headstock to them. It's not quite the same as it was in the 70s or the 80s. It just looks this way until about 1995 when they finally transitioned to what it kind of looks like yet today. So really, the 90s was just a breath of fresh air, kind of like how 2019 was for Gibson. Until all the bad publicity lately anyways. They just brought back all the specs that people were really looking for, because Gibson did some crazy things in the late 80s. But now let's go ahead and talk about the color. You're probably wondering, what exactly is this? Is it black? Is it red? Well, this is the finish that most people call Oxblood. Now, this isn't an official Oxblood because in the pickup cavity it's marked wine red. So I think somebody just shot it a little bit too dark, because the back is still very wine red in my opinion, but the top is unusually dark. Oxblood is a finish that I believe came out sometime in the 80s. It's kind of hard to distinguish them between regular wine reds because sometimes you'll just find unusually dark looking wine reds. Unless I see a stamp that says Oxblood, usually I just consider it wine red. It's not my favorite finish, but who likes this finish? Jeff Beck fans. He's well known for having a 54 wrap tail that has humbuckers, and I believe it was refinished to this Oxblood finish. It's essentially just a dark burgundy that appears black at certain angles and kind of a dark red at others. So to learn more, let's go ahead and throw this one on the workbench and take a look at its individual parts. After a good polishing, let's go ahead and dive in here. So it appears we have original Gibson USA pickups in here. However, I'm questioning if that neck pickup has actually been replaced, because look at this. You've got a braided wire, which you should have, but this one looks like a more modern one that might be able to be coil split with 4-conductor wiring. So I'm guessing that is non-original, but still the original style that would have been in here. At this point in time, you'd be looking at a 490R, 498T. And that's what they're reading, so 7.64, that's correct for a 490 style, and the 498T should be double that, so almost 14. But to be honest with you guys, 90s pickups, they're not as important to be original at this point in time anyways, as the 70s and 80s, because these are still made today, they're easily replaced. Because on a 70s, 80s model, I won't buy them if the pickups have been swapped out unless the price is crazy good, but these guys, I really don't care. Same thing with modern customs. These guys have short neck tenons, and you can see LPC written in there for Les Paul Custom. Remember, there wasn't a custom shop at this time, so these were made right alongside the standards. And it says WR here in the cavity, which stands for wine red. Whoever shot this definitely shot it very dark. It's pretty much Oxblood. There's also a date stamp in there, but I can't quite make it out. That's another difference about these older ones. They have a little control cavity here that the wire goes through instead of just continuing on down like you see modern day. Other than that, I mean, this is just a standard Les Paul 3-way toggle switch here. You're going to notice that dish carve I was talking about a little bit more so than like a 70s or 80s model. This thing still has tons of wear despite me just polishing it up, but it's definitely one for the player. I'm suspicious of the knobs, but they don't really age in the 90s anyway, so not a big deal. You can see the pickguard has left a light impression right there, and the pickup covers themselves are pretty worn. Now the bridge, they're still kind of using up the Schaller made ones at this point, so this one says made in Germany, which means it's era correct for a 90s one. You'll start to see these appear in the late 80s. The earlier 80s just has made in Germany all in one side. The tailpiece is looking correct to me too. So these are 2-piece maple tops. You can just barely see the seam line if you get it in the light just right. And it's a 9-hole weight relieved body that started in 1983, so that's nothing new. But most people don't realize these have been weight relieved. And it's mahogany neck and ebony fretboard with mother of pearl inlays. Now the frets on this one do show some wear on the higher registers of the frets. You can see some divoting wear, especially in the cowboy cord area. Good to know about, but doesn't necessarily affect playability at this time. The truss rod's in good shape. It's about level with the end of the nut. And that distinct 90s Gibson logo. It's very blocky, and you just kind of learn to love it. Nut width 1.68 inches, then 2.03 at the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.93, which increases to 0.99 at the 12th. I usually associate kind of medium necks with the 90s. Moving on to the back here, you can see this has a lot of buckle worming, but looking inside the control cavity tells me everything I need to see. I'm just going to go ahead and say both pickups have been replaced and are non-original to this particular guitar. They might have even rewired the whole thing because those caps aren't right either. But it is around this time when they start using the Gibson branded pots though. So not original condition here. And here's the inside of the toggle switch plate. Moving up the neck, beautiful mahogany wood grain that you can see through, so that's nice. And it looks like our original Grover tuners are still there with the Made in USA stamp. And this one's a 1993 model, 180th day of the year. $4.99 or less no longer means Kalamazoo anymore though, because Kalamazoo's almost been gone for a decade by this point. This example weighs 9 pounds, 7.9 ounces. Let's go ahead and hear how it sounds. So what are my final thoughts on 90s Les Paul Customs? It really truly is a good era if you just like somewhat modern specs. If you don't dig the 70s because of the maple necks and you don't dig the 80s because of, I don't know, whatever reason, I love the 80s models. The 90s, they feel like modern guitars, but they're kind of starting to reach that age where they're vintage in their own right, believe it or not. And there were definitely some cool limited edition runs during this time too. So yes, I would suggest a 90s model. They have a different feel to like a 2000s or an even more modern custom. But I think that's why these things are so highly sought after. They're like the perfect blend between vintage looking and modern appointments. Now, the only things I have to warn you about 90s customs are the fret nib gap thing. That's true on most of these. I mean, this one, it's not too bad, but it is present. And especially on standards and studios, the finish just tends to flake off of the early 90s ones. So if you're interested in being the next owner of this one, you can check out that link in the description. Let's go ahead and review its condition though. This thing's a bit of a road dog. I took this and a The Paul in on trade for that R6 that I had, that limited edition tobacco sunburst one. Honestly, I wasn't a big fan of that trade, but he really wanted that guitar, so I made it happen. You've got lots of scratches on the face of the headstock, nothing too crazy. Truss rod's functioning. I do want to note on the D string that the nut is just slightly cut low. You can hear it just buzzes a little bit. But once you fret a note, it doesn't happen. So yeah, you might want to replace the nut, or you could just do that super glue baking soda trick to raise that up a little bit. The frets do show some wear, as we saw on the workbench, but they were just polished up and the fretboard was oiled, so you're good to go there. I mean, this is definitely a player's axe. I'm not going to sit here and go, here's a ding, here's a ding, here's a ding. I think you can see them here when I run the light over it. I mean, it was definitely somebody's gigging workhorse. It shows lots of wear and tear on the front. But that's what's kind of nice about this one, is if you are a gigging guy, yeah, you don't have to worry about beating up one that's a little bit cleaner. The pickups are the correct set, but I don't think they're original to this guitar. You can see lots of wear to the gold hardware as well. Moving on to the back of the headstock, serial number 91834, looks like 36. You've got your Grover tuners. You've got some edge wear along the sides of the headstock. No like giant chips or chunks off of the headstock like sometimes you'll see. And the neck, just very minor impression marks. We'll shine the light over it here. I bet we'll see a little bit of clear coat wear underneath Blacklight, but in regular lighting situations, it's looking pretty good. And you've got the typical cracking lines around each of the frets. That's just because as the wood expands and contracts, due to like cold and hot temperatures, humidity changes, things like that, the frets don't change size, and that's what causes that. That's also what causes fret sprout on other models, but since you have the binding, you don't have to deal with that. Moving on to the back, it's littered with buckle worming. Worming differs from rash because rash means the finish has been broken. And sometimes it's hard to talk to people when they don't understand the difference between those terms. Because if you tell me a guitar has buckle rash, I'm not interested. But if it's got buckle worming, I'm like, yeah, okay. So if you learn nothing else watching this, maybe now you know the difference between worming and rash. Now that doesn't mean that some of the areas that doesn't have broken finish, like there's a few nicks and dings here and there, but it's a well-worn guitar. Now there is a little bit of finish wear along the heel. It's good here, it's good there, but along this edge, there is like the chipped finish. So that tells me it just chipped away. Sometimes that happens. If it had a neck reset, you'd be able to tell on these other sides too. Looking around the rest of the instrument, you've got some binding cracks along here. It happens sometimes. I mean, it's not falling apart or anything, but it's definitely present and one should be aware of it. And again, the strap buttons have been replaced. I'm not sure what kind of button these are, to be honest. They're like a regular style, but thicker. Let's check it out under Blacklight. Oh yeah, you can see this thing has been out in the sunlight for quite a while. Definitely a gigging machine, glows bright green, but thankfully nothing that we don't want to see. Not yet anyways. Looks like a little bit of sweat absorption here. Looking around the edges. Surprisingly clean. Usually you get some clear coat wear off of these guys. Guess we'll take a look at that neck joint here since there was a little bit of finish wear along this side. There you can see it much easier. The back, surprisingly pretty good. That tells you most of that is just worming. You can see any of the spots that might have been broken through with this test as well. Guess I'll point those areas out up here. Those little dots you see, that's where the finish has been broken a bit. And I'm surprised to see on the back of the neck, it doesn't look like the finish has been worn off, but just a little tiny bit along the edges. So whoever played this thing as much as they did, they must not have very acidic sweat. Or maybe they were just more of a country court player guy. Back of the headstock also looks the way I would want to see. So Blacklight's perfectly as far as I'm concerned. This guitar comes in an era-correct Gibson USA case. It came to me in a 70s case with an orange interior, which is kinda rare, so I thought I'll just play Swapperoo because I know somebody needs that case, so I listed it for sale on Reverb, and hey, I just happen to have this beat-up era-correct one for this guy. So as you can see, it definitely matches the condition of this guitar. I'm sure it'll be sold as the original case for the guitar in the future, but it functions the way it should yet. So we've got the pink interior, good heel support, double neck rest. You have a compartment in here, no case candy or anything. I don't personally like the headstock wedge of this era, but it's there. And hey, this even still has the case shroud. Usually people just cut those things off. But you can see it's been torn apart by long strings. And the combo lock has been busted off. If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of this Gibson Les Paul Custom in an almost Oxblood finish, feel free to check out that link in the description that will take you to the Reverb for sale page. Thank you Troglodytes for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.